So again, these means of financial repression are basically machinations by which government is externalizing their default onto market actors or capital holders. Um, these necessitate, like, for the government to be able to perpetrate that, they need to be able to stifle and silo the free flow of capital. So, to what extent do you think that is possible in a world where Bitcoin is the dominant money? Like, how much? I know this is a big unknown, so I'm obviously not going to hold you to it, but how much does Bitcoin's ascendance to dominant money circumvent or otherwise make less useful capital controls and these other means of siloing and stifling the free flow of capital?
So if Bitcoin gets past the whole critical mass, it becomes widely adopted. I think it does make it much harder to do that. And this it in that sense, it's not unlike other asymmetric technologies of history, right? So for example, gunpowder quickly changed the utility of castles
Mm-hmm.
compared to what their use had been for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And land-based defenses were overcome by air,
Mm-hmm.
air weaponry. And so there's technologies that are asymmetric in the sense that they render obsolete or nearly obsolete older forms of technology,
Right.
and then ideally you get technologies that are they asymmetrically favor the defender. So
Yeah.
encryption is a type of that where it's much harder to try to attack encryption than to use encryption to defend yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
that's basically what one of the premises that Bitcoin is based on. And so part of that is even not even fully proven, right? So encryption, the way
Mm-hmm.
the encryption is tested over time is they prove it the best they can, but then they have to let it mature and to see, can it, for
Right.
10 years, can anything attack this thing? But you never fully know if encryption is entirely bulletproof. But yeah, to the extent that technology continues to work fully as expected, and to the extent that Bitcoin, reaches a wide level of ubiquity, and that the people building on it continue to make it easier and easier to use and self-custody and transfer, because that's a key important. Again, going back to gold, the more
Yeah.
frictions that the gold had, the less likely it was to be, not defeated by fiat.
Right.
And same thing with Bitcoin. The less frictions there are with Bitcoin, the more likely it is to succeed. And that's why I think the companies working on it are key. This is
Mm-hmm.
not just something, it's not just inevitable. It's not something that just works itself over time. The incentive
Mm-hmm.
structures are aligned. The technology, I think, that it's like the right technology for the right time is there. All the ingredients, I think, are there,
Yeah.
but it still has to, the football has to be brought across the end zone.
Right.
And so, but if you get there, I think that represents another form of asymmetric technology.
Yeah.
And, you know, going back to the coercion argument, you can argue so, to you can argue that government taxes and things like that are coercive, but you can also, and financial oppression is coercive,
Mm.
but you could also argue that if someone's free to leave,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not coercive, or at least it's less coercive.
Yeah,
And
the
so you
power
can,
to say no kind of delineates, right? If you have the ability to say no or leave, then technically it's not coercive because you have an exit option.
yeah. And so we can describe governance, governance like fills vacuums. Wherever there's
Mm-hmm.
no governance, there's going to be some sort of structure for how things are handled there. At the
Yeah.
extreme case, if you have ungoverned space, you'll have warlords run it.
Right.
And to the extent that there's government, we ideally want ones that we have more control over, that are given constraints to be more benign.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I'm in a homeowners association. They say you can't have solar panels on your roof, and so, I can say, well, that's stupid. I want to move out, or I can say, well, that's acceptable. I like the area, and so whatever.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, if you're in a country, um, it's much harder to leave. It'd be more burdensome to leave, and you'd have to find someone else that is willing to accept you. And so it's for very large countries where people can't just leave, you can, it's arguably unethical to have a lot of constraints on their behavior. Whereas smaller ones, you can say, well, it's kind of this voluntary thing that people are doing. And to the extent that money's more portable and self-custodial, in theory, it increases people's mobility to move around their own assets and have more selection on where they want to be. And, you know,
Vote with their feet.
exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the downsides is potentially that it, basically means that the rich have more mobility than the poor.
Mhm.
That's already the case and potentially could be more the case. So, it might, just like how gold had externalities that were not necessarily great, there could be some externalities of Bitcoin that, maybe don't work out exactly how we envision or
Mhm.
how we'd hope. But, I still think it's a step change improvement compared to the prior monetary technologies and
Yeah.
the prior technologies that just it's inherently more decentralized. And I think it's, like I said, I would just describe it as the first time where, or at least the first time in 150 years where the speed of money as a bearer asset is caught up to the speed of commerce. And so
Right.
that does in theory reduce the arbitrage that can occur between that money and that commerce.
Right. Yeah, that's a really brilliant point.